after it comes up, but my name's Hafiz Stewart and I'm here to talk to you about the CLIM Vegetation program and probably builds really on what Sasha's said, and that is about sharing the research and monitoring outcomes or products that we've created over the last 5 years. But before I jump into that, I thought I might just talk a little bit more broadly about the CLIM Recovery Project. So the Vegetation program is one of more than 20 management actions that collectively makes up the CLIM Recovery Project. There's a whole lot of management actions around environmental management and environmental monitoring, but also community engagement and partnerships. And the VEG program itself is an integrated natural resource management, on-ground focused activity. The VEG program has 4 presentations at this conference. If you were lucky enough yesterday, we had a presentation on sort of landscape scale prioritisation for pest and weed. We've just had Sasha's presentation on the landscape assessment framework. We've got one tomorrow on Shonoplectus validus, the planting that we did in the inshore areas, and mine, really looking at the products, the ability to share what we've learned over the last 5 years. Critically, I guess, and the important point here is that this conference couldn't have come at a better time for us. We've had 5 years of funding, and it's a 5-year project. Ostensibly, we finish on the 30th of June, so we have one more planting season coming up, but we're in closeout mode. And for us, what we're keen to do is to transition everything that we've learned and to share with the restoration community and the NRM community what are the tools, what are the things that we develop, what is available, what are some of the things that perhaps weren't there when we started or that people may learn from. So the project itself started out of an emergency response to drought. It's federally funded, state funded, but the key point here is that we're able to get this funding because what we were trying to do, and we convinced the agencies, was that we're going to increase ecological resilience. That's a very difficult thing to demonstrate in 5 years, and we heard a few talks about that in the first restoration seminars. And I guess to really demonstrate that, we need ongoing monitoring. So this talk is really about sharing our information, but it's almost a shameless plug. We're interested in finding people who may want to take on some of the work that Sasha talked about to actually go into the future and do monitoring, you know, and create a long-term data set so we can actually go some way to asking that question around ecological resilience. So realistically, we want you. Just before I jump to the rest of the presentation, to put the research and monitoring actions that we did in context, talk a little bit about the aims of why we did that. But the key to this presentation really is a snapshot of all the research projects that we undertook, what we studied, where the data sits, where it can be found, and then go into a little bit more information and detail around some of the data sets that we think are of value, and there's great opportunity to create a longer term monitoring project from. And hoping with that somebody will pick up the torch. So we've seen some of these slides before, but in terms of the projects, it's a 5-year federally and state funded project, very large scale. We worked across 142,000 hectares. We focused on both terrestrial and wetland revegetation, which I think is reasonably unique in a lot of restoration projects. And as Sasha mentioned, the idea of the project was to help buffer the Ramsar wetland and help restore the ecological character of the wetland and build resilience. So what have we achieved in the last 5 years? Since 2012, we've planted more than 4.2 million native plants. We've got a winter planting season coming up, and we have one more summer planting season for Shonoplectus validus, which will bring that total to more than 5 million plants in 5 years. We've planted over 1,700 hectares, more than 200 species of plant, the majority of which are, mid-story and understory species across 148 sites, and we focused on the 5 priority vegetation communities that Sasha spoke about in the previous presentation. If you look at this map here, the majority of our revegetation was concentrated around Lake Alexandrina and Lake Albert. There is some work that came down the Coorong, but there are only a few sites, so we've cut it a bit short. But you get a sense of the spread of sites that we've done. These polygons here in the fluorescent green are the terrestrial revegetation sites, and these little aqua blue are the validus plantings. So the aims of the project really were simply to optimise the success of our plantings, but through doing that, monitor and improve the effectiveness of our program. So we're doing a lot of planting. By determining our success of our planting, we can make changes in how we're going about doing what we're doing to increase our success and the survivorship of plants. But we were also very keen, and we in designing the program, to leave stuff behind. As Sash mentioned the word before, legacy. We set up our research and monitoring program knowing that we wanted to create resources so that we could leave something behind for the revegetation and restoration community. So this is probably the key to the talk, and I won't go into too much detail in regards to the red ones, because they're the three projects that we really see that there's a potential, to take up and do some long-term monitoring on. On the left-hand side is the projects. Across the top is the sorts of data resources that we have, and key to this is where it's stored. So something that we've been really keen on is making sure that we collect the data well, that we curate it well, that we put it somewhere that people can go back and find it, so that if somebody does want to come back and look at it in 5 or 10 years, it's pretty much set up. So you heard a little bit about the bird assessment and the vegetation assessment in Sasha's presentation. I won't go into any detail here, but note that we have a complete data set. Sasha touched, I think, on the river clubrush monitoring. We did a census of the distribution of the sedge communities all the way around Lake Alexandrina and Lake Albert. We'll talk about that in a bit more detail, but we have a full data set there, and it's something that would be really great to go and do in 5 years' time or 10 years' time. Sasha talked about the prioritisation, the restoration prioritisation. We do have GIS layers and a final report that documents that. I probably can't add a lot more to that Sasha hasn't already said. So some of the other projects that we worked on, plant survivorship. So as a simple measure of how successful we were, we did annual monitoring at every site that we planted. We monitored twice immediately after planting. We did winter planting of tube stock, and that determines the loss of plants that you get immediately because of planting shock. And then we did it again at the end of summer, and those plants that have survived through that summer, we can assume, and we're pretty confident, have then recruited successfully and are there into the long term. And for that we have the raw data itself, but we also have reports describing how that happened. The next two, seed germination trials and plant provenance, in collaboration with the South Australian Seed Centre. We worked with them to work on some difficult to propagate species such as niterbush, as well as trying to, add to the legacy of information around plant provenance. So, some of those species where people get a bit uptight about where should you collect material from, should you plant, within 5 metres of where you collected the stuff from, or can you be a bit more generic? So, I guess the idea of this conference is to share this stuff that people know that it's there. And the key point here is that the actual data and the information is stored on their website. So if you don't know that location, come and see me afterwards and I can hook you up. We talked very quickly about sedge mapping, complete data set. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Collaboration with the University of Adelaide, and an honours student undertook research on 3 types of guards and looked at the impact of that guarding type on plant survivorship and growth, and complete data set there. We worked with the South Australian Conservation Council in regards to Phragmites australis and looking at its autoecology, and particularly around its invasiveness, with the view that we want to try and head towards some sort of management in that nearshore zone. And last but not least, again, Sash talked about it, the Site Planners Guide. We have some GIS layers and a final report regarding that. It's a good document. It's very specific for the Klim region, but the idea of it is something that others might look at and might be useful to direct restoration or revegetation in other areas. So here's one of the specific data sets that we think is a fantastic opportunity for somebody to build on. We used the 20-minute 2-hectare survey method. There were 3 samples taken within a season. 151 sites were surveyed. You can see there are 100 in re-veg sites, 50 in remnant sites, and it was done for each of 3 years. And I guess one of the things that we're very keen is, and we've invested in, is actually writing a paper which is in preparation at the moment, which actually describes that baseline, and it's a fantastic jumping point for somebody then to have to compare what's happened to these birds in the revegetated communities and remnant sites over time. The data's in BWSA. Similarly with the vegetation assessments, they were initially done as part of the landscape assessment framework, and it was about defining community composition and structure. We surveyed 194 sites. 142 of those were added in terms of doing the composition. Obviously, you were doing it from the remnant sites, but we then added another 142 revegetated sites. They were monitored for each of 3 years. They're paired to the bird sites. A similar paper's in preparation describing a baseline, and the data is stored in BWSA. The sedge monitoring, which I alluded to before, so we did 2 types of monitoring here, or not so much monitoring, but a census. So in terms of directing where we were going to do our restoration within the water's edge, it was very important to us to determine where existing stands of each of the different sedge communities were existing in the lakes. So we used that to help direct where we planted. But once we planted them, much like the survivorship, we're also then keen just to monitor the growth and expansion of the plants. But probably key here is the ecological impact of planting these sedge plants. By planting them at least 30 metres away from the lake edge, you create an effect where you slow the water down and create perfect conditions for the semi-aquatic community to improve and increase. And we have 4 years of data across 21 sites, across a range of treatments. It would be fantastic to follow that through time and actually see how complex those communities become. So in summary, the VEG program has accumulated a lot of data. The data has continuity across sites, across treatments, and across time. The data and the methodologies are robust. The data is clean and tidy. It's ready to go. We really feel strongly that there's a potential here to actually set up a long-term data set and really leverage off the fantastic opportunity we've had to invest in understanding this site. So, if there is anyone here who's interested in that sort of thing, or there are people that you know who may want to take this on, please come and speak to me. During the conference, I work for Juna. I can give you my contact details. Please chase me out. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Haif. We've got time for some questions.
Just briefly, I wonder whether you had much direct seeding in any of your program and how that compared to planting, etc.
So we're only giving you half the presentation. I kind of alluded to the fact that this project was trying to do many things, but was really targeted at both ecological resilience and community resilience. So we're a very well-funded project, but we made a specific decision to use tube stock, because it's through the tube stock that the community could actually get involved in the recovery of the site. We did look at doing some direct seeding in terms of its applicability, and it has very limited applicability in the areas that we worked in, so there aren't any comparisons, but we were very keen to use tube stock for a number of reasons in terms of your ability to control the species mix that you've got and the survivorship and that kind of thing, but also because we're very keen to have the community collecting the seed, growing the seed, learning through all that process, and then actually, planting the plants out into the field. So the answer is no. Well, I think there is some. There's some limited. We know of different projects that have tried to do some direct seeding, and in some areas it's worked, but in others it hasn't. At the scale at which we were working, and over the 5 years, it wasn't something that we wanted to do in our program.
One quick one.
Hi. I was just wondering how much of that area planted was private and public land, and also just how much of the understory was native grass.
Wow, that's some good questions, and this is the point at which I'm going to tell you I'm the manager of the program, so I don't have the absolute details, but a fair bit of our plantings was on private property. We said about 158 sites. What tended to happen is the community had a relationship, or does have a relationship with a whole lot of landholders, and they tended to, I think of those 148 sites, 110 were the community revegetation sites, and 95% of those are on private property, and they tended to be fairly small sites. We tended to plant much bigger sites, and they were a mixture of conservation parks, the Coorong National Park, that kind of thing, but also on private land. But I'd say, at a guess, and I'm looking at my data guru in front of me, and she'll probably say I'm wrong, more than 3/4 of what we did was on private land. There was one other part of the question, though. So native grasses, the starter program, we didn't focus a lot on native grasses. We had some perceptions around their survivorship. We did some trials to improve our survivorship of native grasses, and native grasses did become a much bigger component of our planting species list, but that's something that you could probably follow up with Sasha, because that's one of his pet interests in the program. I couldn't tell you the specifics, sorry.
All right, we're out of time, so thanks for that, Hafe.